Thanks everyone for coming. And what a beautiful space and a really exciting new festival. Pleased to be here. So these three books are non-fiction, and they straddle a really interesting line between kind of memoir and self-help, but also an exploration of how we live today. And the common thread in these books is that they're books by journalists, but they're internal journeys. So the quest isn't outward, discovering kind of what's out there in the world. The quest is discovering what's in here and how to live, you know, in a world that's flawed, in a body that's flawed, in a personality that's flawed. Although all of you are incredibly amazing people, so that's just an abstract thing. But the common thread of these books is that it's a quest that takes you inward, and with Amal it's all things New Age. With Shannon it's into the world of mindfulness, and Rick it's a venture into the world of intimacy and connection. So I guess I just want to ask each panellist separately, we'll probably start with you, Rick, about why this quest? Why did you go on the quest? And what did you find once you got there?
Thank you, Brigid. I do have personality flaws, and this book was really about addressing them. That's only half a joke. It's also, I hate the idea of self-help because, look at me. I was just smoking a Long Beach menthol outside before. I'm not really the guy you want to get that kind of advice from. But this book was, I'd shut myself off from the world in my 20s because I had stopped loving because, I had this one formative experience when I was 7 where one of the people who should have loved me the most, my father, was unable to in one of the moments of my life when I most needed him to, which was when I was alone on this cattle station and my brother had almost died and he was away in hospital with my family. And it was just me and Dad, and I watched him have this affair with our 19-year-old governess. And so this kind of shattering of trust had polluted the rest of my life, where I thought, I've been that hurt before, I don't want to be that hurt again, and the way that I can avoid that is to shut myself off from the world. And that's what I did through my 20s, and I thought it was working. And it's one of those things where you can convince yourself it works for a while until you hit this kind of barrier or rock bottom, and then you lose your marbles, essentially, which is what happened to me. And it was this idea that I wasn't being touched or held that kind of did it for me first, where I realised that I had no contact with human beings for the better part of a decade.
What was the losing the marbles?
Oh, God. I'm just picturing a kid actually losing his marbles at this point, going, oh, no, my marbles. That's what it was like. I was having traumatic episodes, so I was dissociating. I was having panic attacks that did not stop. I couldn't sleep. I was having suicidal thoughts every day. I thought everybody hated me. I distrusted everyone. And, these were relationships that I knew were good and strong, but I still didn't believe that they loved me. And that was kind of this point where I just kind of severed myself from the world. And that was the breaking point. And then I realised I had to get over it. And that's what this book is about. It started with a diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And this book is about learning to love again.
Well, partly because of what Rick said, he hates self-help, and I think a lot of people need self-help. Look, the book was probably something that was going through my mind for many years, and I didn't realise I was already writing it. I had spent many years, if you had known me 15 years ago, I looked very different. And so we talk about inner transformation, but it's reflected in your external world. And there was something about wanting to sort of, marshal all of this information that I had gained, all this knowledge that I had finally came to understand about life and human suffering, and realising that we were all sort of using different vehicles to get to the same destination. And I thought, there is a lot of performative stuff in the New Age, but the New Age isn't that new as well. So I had to sort that out in my head, what is the New Age? And I realised that the New Age was just sort of a very performative modern interpretation of existing traditions. And so I thought, well, okay, if humans have been doing this for thousands of millennia, we're not that different in some ways, are we? We're still seekers. We're always trying to understand ourselves better and understand our place in the world. And I think there's something even deeper, that I think humans really crave significance. We want to feel like our lives matter, not just to ourselves, but to other people.
So just going back when you said you were different 15 years ago and you look different, what do you mean by that?
Oh, I wore a headscarf. I I did weigh more. Not that that's the most important thing, but I did lose a bit of weight. And I'm a big believer that your body tells you a lot about where you are in life. I think it's not a criticism. It's just me being reflective here. I think I was very shuttered. You said you spent your 20s hiding. Oh my God, like I literally hid myself behind a headscarf because I was too afraid to be out in the world and show myself and experience and smash into people, in a legal way. But it was this sense of there's something so beautiful and divine about connection, and human connection is so important. And I think a lot of what drives the New Age is that sense of community, this sense that I found people who think like me, people who can understand me. And, at the end of the day, everything we engage in is storytelling. Like we're always just telling stories, aren't we? We're always trying to understand ourselves through stories, whether it's through a television show or through mythology. And, much of New Age is built on myth.
So just to go back to the headscarf thing, like did your religious identity change in that journey from being Muslim to being New Age? Or
this is going to get controversial now. No. I'm not a New Ager, and this is not insulting New Agers. I'm definitely not. I don't subscribe to any one thing. I was definitely quite religious. Like I was really trying to be religious. I think that's a better way to put it. Like I understood that this was what I'd inherited, and I thought I have to make sense of this, and I have to make sense of the world through this lens. And it took a bit of courage, but funnily enough, it was my mum who gave me Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life. And I was like, this is so embarrassing, I'm not going to read this book. And I totally read it. And what was interesting about it was there was stuff in there that I thought, I'm not going to stand in front of a mirror and say I love myself unconditionally and all this sort of thing. And there were some of her ideas that I just didn't resonate with, but she really opened my eyes to like how hard we are on ourselves. Like, gosh, we don't really like ourselves much, do we?
My therapist made me do that.
No, yeah,
I gave it up because I'm like, I don't have time.
And like, did you try to hide the cover? But I think this is the interesting thing. Like, if you were to sit with yourself, how would you treat yourself? And so we're constantly looking to others to tell us who we are, to feel liked by others. You said I felt like nobody liked me. And of course they liked you, but you didn't like yourself, perhaps. So I think this is what is at the heart of all seeking is, who am I? What's my relevance? How do I connect in a meaningful way? And honestly, I think it gets diluted in all the woo-woo stuff that you see, like the crystals and, water bottles with crystal licks. I don't know, like just stuff that is just very like distracting and ritualistic that makes people feel, and I'm not against ritual, I think it's important. But really, we're seeking experience, right? It's not about that. So,
and Shannon, you've done a year of mindfulness, which of course, has been successful, and that year has now turned into many years. Can you tell us a bit about your quest, like what took you on that path, and what you discovered?
Yeah, so it started because I went in search of the mental equivalent of a 30-minute workout. So at the time that the project began, the leading medical science journal, The Lancet, had just published a landmark series which was highlighting the fact that every country in the world, including Australia, was facing and failing to tackle a host of mental health problems. And the emphasis is on the word failing. And that was before the COVID-19 pandemic shattered everything. And so I myself was in a pretty vulnerable space. I just had my second child, and although I wasn't in the midst of a full breakdown or experiencing an episode of depression or, flashbacks of trauma or anything like that, the question was, well, what can I do for myself here to prevent a decline? And more importantly, what can I do to teach my kids how they can protect and nurture and nourish their minds? And for me, I'm the sort of person who really enjoys reading peer-reviewed academic papers. Like nothing better than sitting poolside with a cocktail and reading something like that. And so I thought, well, what does the science tell us? And when I searched and searched, what was really surprising to me is that there actually wasn't a universally agreed upon mental equivalent of eating 5 fresh fruit and vegetables a day. And the closest thing was mindfulness. And I've stopped using the word mindfulness meditation. I use the word mindfulness training.
Can you just tell us what mindfulness is?
Yeah, I mean, obviously mindfulness has got many different definitions. And so, to be really clear, when I'm talking about mindfulness, I'm talking about the mindfulness that's being put under the microscope by some of the leading academics around the world. So it's a particular type of mental training that is very much like a skill. So in the same way that we're teaching our young people to read books, mindfulness training is a lot like learning how to read your own mind and your own inner experiences. Actually, there's a beautiful description in your book, Rick, where you're not actually talking about mindfulness particularly, but when you went you did the neural training.
Oh, yes.
And
the neurofeedback.
The neural feedback training. And I was like, oh my God, he's being taught mindfulness, to actually sit back and observe, as though you're a third person, your inner experience, your mental experience. And what comes from that, especially with the help of an excellent teacher, is empowerment, because for the first time ever in my life, I was taught how I could heal myself, rather than being relied on a third person to kind of guide me through a series of therapies or, shine a light on my inner childhood trauma or whatever it was. I was able to actually understand how my mind works and then do with that what I can. Yeah.
So there's always a lag time with books, and obviously these books were written a while ago. What have you guys discovered from your journeys into these different worlds that you could actually recommend to people here today? And also, what discovery has surprised you?
Everyone's like, really?
You're up.
I mean, one of the first things I got taught, and I've done mindfulness through therapy, and I find it amazing, and the neuroscience behind it is extremely solid. I mean, neuroscience is effectively mindfulness anyway, because you're understanding that this thing has so much power over you, particularly your subconscious, and that you think you're aware of it in your day-to-day life, but you're actually not. And so just knowing that in and of itself is so helpful. But I remember when I first got diagnosed with complex PTSD, it was in around April 2019, and then 4 weeks later I was off on the federal election campaign following Scott Morrison around, which is not a good therapy.
That's definitely going to affect you.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to that moment, because there's like 16-hour days, like we're on that Hyde charter plane that they have with all the journos following them around for a week. We went to Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane, Darwin, back to Adelaide, and then back to Sydney. And I was doing progressive muscle relaxation the entire time. So, in the morning for half an hour I would progressively...
Did you relax your brain when you were with Morrison?
Honestly, if there was a way to unspool my brain and just leave it on a drying rack, I feel like that would probably be the nicest piece. But you start by clenching your toes for 10 seconds really tightly, and then releasing them, and then moving to your ankles, and then moving to your calves, knees. You get to the point where you're actually doing your eyeballs, or the muscles around your eyes, and for half an hour, and you do that, and the sense of calm, it's just a way to re-center your mind in your body. It sounds like woo, but it's incredibly well documented. It's just a way for you to be in the moment. And I was doing that for half an hour in the morning and half an hour every night after pulling 16-hour days. So I just remember thinking, this is such a weird time and place in my life. And Scott Morrison was not helping at all, but it was a start. And I think that was a huge moment for me. And the other thing, just really quickly, is that in terms of being vulnerable and being loving, you don't see these things in the world unless you have a language for them. Now, we have language in the English language for these things, but if you don't say it in your own head, if you don't say it out loud to people around you, you don't notice it, and you're not prepared to receive it. And so just simply being aware and actively voicing these things has made my life much more loving and much more kind of content, I would think.
Because I've noticed I've known Rick for a number of years, and at some point, it must have been when you were writing this book, you started saying, I love you, and giving me hugs. And I was like, what's going on?
And you're like,
here?
Fuck off, mate.
But, I mean, that was reading your book, that was a deliberate thing that you started doing was to be, to say those things.
Yeah, because you would have met me during probably some of the worst parts of my stuff, and you wouldn't have known unless my mate had told you. Yeah, I've probably told you, but she probably did. But I don't know whether you ever noticed, but I was incredibly withdrawn, and I didn't think I had a right to be at the pub with these people, because I'm like, oh, they're all smart and writers, and I would go there. If I left my house at all, I'd go there and I would feel under attack the entire time, because I'm like, if I say something, they're going to think I'm an idiot. And then, slowly started coming out of my shell, and part of that was confidence, and part of that was confidence with saying I love you and having it returned, which is just a very nice way to go about life. I'm like, what an idiot I was for thinking I could go through life without doing any of these things.
Did that change things, like with your friends and the people around you saying I love you?
It did, and it's not like I needed to hear it from them. It helped when I did, every now and then, but it's not something I would say it every day, but I didn't expect them to say it in return. But it was just me placing it out there in the world. It was like it was a real thing. And it's kind of like forgiveness. Like I'm a huge fan of this idea of being able to forgive others their transgressions where they've admitted wrongdoing, and tried to come to terms with this. Because I feel like you need to believe that it can be done elsewhere so that you can do it in your own head. Like, I can't forgive myself if I don't believe in forgiveness. And I think that's a really important thing to realise, is that it has to be out in the world to make it real.
Are we going in a row? Okay. We didn't discuss this before.
Writers.
What? People want to listen to us? Sorry, I've got hay fever, by the way. I just thought I would apologise for all the...
It's not COVID.
It's not COVID. The thing I always say, I thought about this a lot when I'd finished the book. I thought, well, what can people take away from this? And I'm a big believer in creativity as being essential to people's lives. I actually think if you are completely anti-woo, you don't have to wrap it up in that. Creativity, to me, is a very spiritual, magical thing, it doesn't have to be for you. But I've noticed that the more creative people tend to be more content in life, and that's because their energy is going into something. And it's not about fame, and it's not about making money from it. Sometimes people derive just great joy from that usefulness, that energy that goes into something they're good at. The other thing I would say is having some sort of practice is also highly valuable to your life. And it was probably the way Rick said was great, like it's a language. So it's not the solution, you are the solution, but it's the structure through which you understand yourself better. So, a lot of people love yoga because it really does affect their physicality. It releases mental stress. There's a little bit about that where people say that, if you do certain yoga poses, it might release like trauma and things like that. And I don't know, I know people who've had I've had interesting experiences. I don't do a lot of yoga. It's not my thing. I like meditating, but meditation, yoga, whatever it is that you like, dancing. Some people just love dancing, to them that's a form of spiritual release.
When you say practice, do you mean something that is done on a regular basis at the same time?
Yeah, and you might evolve out of it. So this is the other thing. Be open to evolution. Like, the point isn't to stay the same. The point is to be brave enough to change. And I think this is what we're resisting. We're resisting our own evolution because it's scary. And I can tell you that, honestly, if you had known me 15, 20 years ago, I wouldn't... If someone had told me I'd be sitting on a stage talking about this stuff, I wouldn't have believed it, because it just 20 years ago me wasn't that person. I've evolved into that person. And now I have more courage to get up and say things like, hey, have you ever done a crystal healing? It's okay. And I don't feel stupid saying it. I don't care. I love that I can be... So I think our vulnerability and our awareness are our superpowers, and I think that we underutilize them constantly. And I mean, Brené Brown very famously talks about the power of vulnerability, but what about awareness? And I don't mean even just present moment awareness, and I know mindfulness is very big on sort of like zoning in on the moment, but what about an expansive awareness? We make ourselves the star of the show all the time, and so we take everything personally, and everyone hates us, and how could they do that to me, and I'm never going to forgive them. And it's like, if you actually just zoomed out a bit that person probably isn't thinking about you at all.
They don't care about you at all.
They don't care as much
time.
as you think they do, but you do. So I think awareness is, like, my best friend said, your book is about people being themselves. And I said, oh, God, no, it's not that at all. It's actually awareness. It's about awareness. It's about having the courage to say, what do I like doing and why, and what is it going to give me, and how does that improve my life? Because you don't have to be perfect. The idea isn't to turn into some superhuman who's never having a bad day. It's knowing that the bad day can come and it'll go. Like, and you're not going to break down because of it. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid of those moments. And I'm not trying to downplay genuine trauma and difficulty because, my father has a chronic illness, for example, and I've noticed that over time you become quite immune to like the symptoms of that, or like the episodes that come with chronic illness sometimes. And someone explained it to me as like, well, you're a very resilient person and you've become a bit apathetic. And it's not that, it's survival. You learn how to survive. But I also don't ever want to lose my feeling. It's like I still want to feel things for my father and for what he's going through and all of that.
So we're talking about surprising takeaways. Is that
surprising takeaways, and also your year of mindfulness was probably now a couple of years ago. So what has stuck? What are the things that you tried that have fallen away, and what's the thing that you've taken with you?
I was surprised that I actually managed to meditate every day for a year. And I confess that if not for the fact that I had a team of scientists who were tracking me, I probably wouldn't have stuck with it. Because I think one thing that many people don't acknowledge about something like mindfulness training is that it's really hard, often unpleasant. And if it's not...
Why is it unpleasant?
Unpleasant, if you had 5 minutes inside my brain, you would realise... mindfulness training, to sit with our own inner experiences, unless you're a very, very, very rare human being who has no form of suffering, sitting for 45 minutes with that inner experience can be extremely difficult to do.
It's like getting a ticket to a really shit haunted house, isn't it?
Yeah. or a movie you didn't want to see.
Correct. Right? And in a world where there are gorgeous Highlanders to watch on Netflix, with our very rare moments of downtime, who actually wants to sit with our unpleasant experiences and do the work, do the training. So I think that surprised me that I stuck with it. And the other major surprise to me is that I come from a history that I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. I did everything that my conventional doctors recommended, and then when that failed to make me better, I turned to alternative therapies. And it was one year when I was doing my taxes and I realised that I'd spent tens of thousands of dollars and I still wasn't any better, that I actually started thinking, okay, I need to use these same critical thinking skills that I've been taught as a journalist, and I need to apply that to my health. And that's why I started learning how to read academic papers. And so in some ways, I came to this project with science as my faith, that everything that the scientists told me was truth. What was really surprising to me is that the scientists don't always agree with one another, despite the fact that they've been published in the most respected journals. This scientist doesn't like that scientist. And that was really interesting to me, that science isn't gospel. And even more interestingly is that 3/4 of the way through the project, it did not matter to me what the scientists found anymore. I had 2 neuroscientists, I had people studying my subjective well-being, my stress hormones, my cellular aging, my gene expression. They were studying all of that to see what, if anything, changed as a result of the practice. And 3/4 of the way through the project, I didn't care anymore. And I knew that I would be meditating every day for a year, beyond the year. Because the transformations that had happened in my life as a direct result of this mental training was so monumental. So just to give you some idea of it, since I was a teenager, I've been an insomniac. And 1 or 2 nights a week, I would lie in bed, awake, and listen to the sound of the dawn chorus. Unable to sleep. I don't know how many people here have experienced insomnia. Can I have a show of hands?
I have trouble sleeping.
Yeah, insomnia is the worst, right? And what's really interesting to me about this mindfulness training is that I haven't had insomnia in years.
You see results, right? And that's the evidence that you need. And so you stop even trying to prove it to people, because it's like, this is so precious to me, this personal experience that I have, right? And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of New Age is it's very performative, and you're upselling and you have to spend thousands of dollars, and you shouldn't have to spend thousands of dollars. If you are, just check in with yourself and ask if you're really getting any benefit out of it.
I mean, one of the things, and it'd be great to talk to you guys about, like one of the things that worries me about a lot of wellness stuff is that you have to have a certain amount of money and time to get benefits. And so often the people that need it the most are either too busy or too poor. Did you guys find that in your kind of exploration of this world that there were barriers to entry?
Yeah. It's quite embarrassing to admit, because people will be like, what's the single biggest thing that helped you? And it was my book advance. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it made me feel comfortable for the first time in my life, where I didn't have to look over my shoulder and wonder about, whether my mum would be able to eat or pay her electricity bill. I renovated her bathroom and I bought her a car for Christmas. And it just made everything, I think there was so much about what goes wrong in our lives, I've now realised, is the stress from poverty and financial insecurity. So when the federal government worries about how to fix mental health and they don't do anything outside of their health department, but actually do something incredibly punitive in social welfare, they are making the problem worse. And that to me was the biggest, it gave me the cognitive capacity to sit back and actually take stock of my life for the first time in my entire adulthood, to the point where I actually had spare energy up here. The brain is 2 to 3% of your body's total mass. At rest, it takes up 25% of the energy. And so when you're stressing about these things, you don't have time for anything else. And now I'm learning fucking French, which was not a survival skill. It's not necessary in my life whatsoever. And I'm doing it. I'm going to take up piano, or take it up, I'm not going to pick it up, but I'm going to try and learn, because I'm like, well, why not? I've got time and space now. And I don't know how much of what I've achieved has been purely because I started earning enough money.
I think that this is such an important topic to talk about, is this equity issue in the wellness industry and well-being. One of the things that also came about throughout this project is realising that, well, it's all very well for me as an educated white woman who lives on the northern beaches of Sydney to turn around and say, mindfulness changed my life. I was like, everybody should do it. But the truth...
Especially if you do it like that, by the way.
My husband hates that voice. But the point is that this idea that mental well-being is a human right, that we should be able to... one of the really fascinating things that when I did the maths on if every single person in the world were to have access to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, we'd be able to see them once every 20 years, something like that. There is just not enough mental health treatment that's on offer. So the idea that one-on-one therapy is going to solve our mental health problems is just a complete misnomer, which is why I think that mindfulness is so interesting. And that's actually how I ended up in the Middle East as part of this project. So at that same moment where I realised that I would continue practicing mindfulness training for the rest of my life, I realised that it's all very well for me to say that I've found my way, my thing, but what about people who are really suffering? And so I ended up on the front lines of the humanitarian crisis, where more people have been displaced by war and famine than since World War II. And I ended up in what was, at the time, one of the biggest refugee camps in the world on the border of Syria and Jordan. And when you see trauma at that scale, I had a drone with me. My cinematographer had a drone. We couldn't get the drone high enough in the air to capture the edges.
Zaatari. Yeah, it's like a city, basically. They say it's like big enough to be a city.
Exactly. It is phenomenal. And you think that all of that trauma, we're aware of our trauma here, but that's trauma that's now going to get passed on to generation after generation after generation. And you think, God, one-on-one therapy, really? Like, is that...
I need to give people tools so that they don't, that they can start to establish that wellness in themselves as well.
And I'll throw it back to you guys in a sec, but I'll just say this one thing. There's an extraordinary researcher named Amit Bernstein who has adapted some of the leading mindfulness programs to make it trauma-informed. And he's been delivering this 9-week program to refugees who have been shown to have the highest levels of post-traumatic stress ever recorded in a population. And there was one of the refugees who'd been through the program, a man named Dawit Habtai, who had been a former child soldier and witnessed torture and given torture and everything that you can imagine that is horrendous about humanity. And he said to me, we were in Israel when we were doing this interview, and he said, if somebody offered me mindfulness training or 10,000 Israeli shekels to make all my problems go away, I would take the mindfulness training because it's the first time that anybody has ever shown me how I can heal myself. And so I think that in and of itself tells us a lot about the potential for this form of mental training. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the biggest criticism of the New Age space and more widely wellness. So mind, body, spirit is really the umbrella, and New Age sits under that. And I think the big misconception is that New Age is the umbrella. It's not. It's one component of a bigger marketplace, and it is a marketplace. And this is the problem, because as humans, we have a right to, like, if I'm investing in, something, I need to get paid for my services, but what's reasonable? How do you put a price on that? And unfortunately, it does attract a lot of charlatans. It's funny that you bring up Zatru, because in the book I interview a woman she was from Iran. And she healed herself. She had trauma. She healed herself through dance. And she now goes into the refugee camps and teaches the refugee women something. It's a form of conscious dance, which I absolutely can't stand because I'm so self-conscious.
That's a shame, because we're going to close off the panel.
Everybody get up. We're going to do some ecstatic dancing. Look, I struggled with conscious dance personally. But it is really about your body. There are a lot of people who just have no qualms having a religious experience in a room full of strangers, and I'm just not that person. But what was interesting was she said you could see how their bodies would change, sort of just the stiffness in their bodies, the way the trauma sat in their bodies. This is real stuff. This is the problem. You asked earlier, what did you learn? And I just thought, it really pisses me off how much derision there is against wellness because of the crap that people pull, because there is so much goodness in it and so much to be found for people who genuinely need it. And a lot of the problem is the heightened sort of, the high cost of yoga retreats and things like that, they're an indulgence essentially. And so people think, well, I can't afford that. Well, a lot of the New Age practices and traditions are derived from poor countries. You don't need a lot of money for a spiritual experience. It's just that in the West... You don't have
to do it in Bondi either.
No, it's in the West that we've made it a commodity. We've commoditized your spiritual experience, and we're upselling you as well. You're not actually getting better. You're getting higher up the scale of needing to get even better. So that's not the point. If you can meditate or do mindfulness or do something where you have full awareness and the ability to identify the issues, you are then equipped for life, to improve your life. And I'm not selling you anything here. I'm trying to sell my book. But other than that, I don't run courses or anything.
We're running out of time, but I guess I just wanted to ask... I just want to ask the panel, what conditions, it's a big question, what conditions exist in the world that you think are causing the alienation that has then caused you to write the book? I might kick off and just say I think, the amount of screens in our phones seem to be something that creates some alienation and creates disconnection, whilst also providing connection. But is there any, what are the things in our world that you think are getting in the way of tranquility?
Good question. I have a thesis which I explore in a chapter in my book called Dysfunction, that almost every social disorder that you can possibly imagine is caused either in that generation or a few generations before that by someone who didn't love someone the way they should have. Now, I'm not one of these conservatives who believes that, every kid should have a mother and a father. I believe that if you have a mother and a father, then ideally both of those parents would stick around in your life one way or the other. If you've got two mums, two dads, a trans woman and a trans father, I don't care what the mix is. If you've got two parents, even if they're no longer together, you can really ruin a kid's life by not being there for them. And then if you track those things through stats, so the New South Wales government has done this, looking at, the kids in out-of-home care who are very much like the Romanian orphans under Ceausescu, who were never held or touched or cared for, and had horrific lives, not just mentally, but they had malfunctioning digestive systems. They were shorter on average than their peers who were not in the orphanages. So all through the social system, you see it in the criminal justice system, you see it in drug addiction and abuse, you see it in kind of the number of single parents. My brother went, is still at the tail end of a really horrific period in his life where he was a meth addict. And, at one point he was with this woman who was similarly just down and out. She had almost nothing going for her at all because her parents were both drug addicts, because their parents were cruel. And, she was trying her best to love this kid that she had. It wasn't my brother's son, but it was her son. And then Child Protection accidentally ran it over in her driveway. And it's what chance does anyone have when you've got... And her life was like that, not because she's a bad person, not because she was not moral or because she didn't make the right choices. What choices did she have? Going back to this original seed, which was someone who was too violent, emotionally unavailable, who didn't love. It's love. It's love all the way down, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree that we are love. Essentially, we have varying forms of that, and how we show it matters. I think that there are two things that really jump to mind, though, and this is all tied in together. There's no exclusive answer to this, really. Power imbalances are a huge problem in our lives. Racism is about power. Sexism is about power. Anyone who's been a journalist knows that, you don't work in a newsroom. It's all about power, right? You're subject to crude comments and... but that's for another session. The other thing I would say is we have this very nasty habit as humans of seeking external validation and fulfillment through things. So when I have this, I'll be happy. When I get that car, I can show people who I am. Do you even know who you are? Who are you without the car? That's the hard stuff. That's the really, what you were talking about, going in, oh my God, that's no holiday, right? And, a lot of people don't want that. They want to show people who they are. They want to show themselves that if I can achieve my goals, I can tell you I've achieved goals that mattered to me so much. And at the end of it, I was like, oh, is that it?
I felt like that after writing my first book.
Right?
I'm I guess my life is the same.
I guess, okay, all right. I was a bit anticlimactic. Why? Because what mattered wasn't the book. It was what happened to me in the process. And believe me, I changed in the process of writing my first major non-fiction book, which is, it was about Arab women. And I had to confront all these things about my own experiences being an Arab woman, but also compute and process all these trauma stories that I heard from other women. And I won't lie, I went and saw a therapist. Luckily, I only had to go a couple of times because I'm very self-aware. And then she told me that, and so I felt very good. And she was like, I don't need to see you again. And I'm like, great. But, it's this thing of I'll be happy when you catch yourself saying that, yeah. That's a big sign that we've got a problem. And we live, unfortunately, in a social media world where everybody's happy because they've got the appearance of happiness. And so we get fooled into thinking that we're less than, that we're not meeting the needs of our time or ourselves or anyone, because I don't have this. I have hardly any followers on Instagram. I don't really care. I don't think it's a sign of anything if I did, If I need it, though, that tells me something about myself. So...
Rick and I were saying earlier how addicted we are to Twitter, and these two are like, oh, you don't need that.
I was on Twitter and I hated it. I got off.
I want to go walk into the ocean later and never come back.
We're so judging you, yeah.
I think just to sort of add to what you said and really to dive into that question of what's causing disconnection, I think that, our technology's got a lot to answer for. I think our past trauma has got a lot to, our unanswered past trauma has got a lot to answer for, and our culture as a whole. But I also think that advertising has got a lot to answer for, because there's a whole industry in making us feel unfulfilled. Because if we buy their stuff, then we will be fulfilled. So we can, actually engage at that level. The word that I think that describes it for me is discomfortable. Is that nobody, until I undertook my year of living mindfully, nobody had ever actually taught me how to suffer, like how to actually be with my pain and how to just sit with it, or even not necessarily my deep pain, physical or emotional pain, but anything unpleasant. And the realisation with my phone and the decision to shut down my social media came about when I noticed that I had become addicted to every moment of unpleasantness. If I was bored in a lift, or somebody had said something that was mildly insulting, or any kind of moment of stillness, I had my phone in my hand and I was checking. Actually, email was my big problem. And just constantly wanting a hit of pleasure. And the training, the mindfulness training, actually invited me and taught me how to sit with something unpleasant. Like how to sit with my cravings, how to sit with my negative self-talk, how to sit with all of that crap that comes with being a human. And I think that, the word that I use to describe this is how to be discomfortable, comfortable despite the fact that something is uncomfortable. And I think I look at some of the people in my life now who are in the grip of addiction or, whatever, the complex, mental health issues, and I think, God, I just wish somebody, and they'd never listen to me because, of course, you never listen to somebody you've got to find, the answers elsewhere. But I do think that if it was just taught as routine in school, okay, kids, let's just sit with being unpleasant. Let's just invite that in and learn how. Yeah.
Crazy talk. Just somebody let her out right now. No social media?
I'm just going to do one really final quick blitz of a question and then open it out to you guys. I guess the future, we've just had kind of almost the global equivalent of you guys going on an internal quest with COVID and people being forced, very much like your book, Shannon, to sit in the discomfort, to not travel, to not have that sort of control. And we're now, I think, about to enter a new era. So I guess, are you guys optimistic or pessimistic? And one line as to why. Rick.
One line?
We've got
brutal.
We've got 45
journalists
seconds.
here.
Yeah, all right.
Or two max.
I'm a cynical optimist, and I always have been. Those things are competing tensions in my life, internally, but especially externally. I feel like I caused COVID because I only just started travelling for fun. I never did it in my 20s, and then I went to Tokyo in January last year, and then I went to New York in March last year. And then they shut Broadway, and I was like,
said, "Here, hold my beer."
Yeah, it said, "Look at this uppity idiot. Thinks that he can go and jump classes and go travelling around the world now. What an idiot!" So yeah, I don't know how things are going to turn out, and I like living like that.
But optimistic or pessimistic, though?
Oh, I'm cautiously optimistic. I always have been. I don't think I would be alive if I wasn't. Because I never had any cause to be optimistic, and yet I just thought that my life would turn out okay, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
Maybe, I guess, I'm probably realistic and hopeful in some way, but I believe we have capacity for change. I'm just not convinced people want it sometimes. So I think when COVID first happened, I remember writing about it and saying, I don't think it's going to change a lot of people. I think it's going to test them. And it's sort of like you have this gift, strangely, in a horrible situation. Any horrible situation is a gift because it's telling you how are you going to rise to the occasion? What is it going to tell you about yourself and what are you going to do with that? And I read somewhere, and very quickly, I know this is more than 2 lines, but I read somewhere that they were hoping for like some baby boom after the pandemic, and instead it's like all these divorces. And I was like, yeah, because we spend so much of our lives avoiding each other and the truth of who we are and the truth of what we want, and then suddenly people like bang, stuck together, and it's like, I fucking hate you, so it's like this thing of, avoidance. So if you can rise to the challenge, I'm hopeful.
I lived alone and I had the same. I divorced myself.
Look, even I'm a hermit, but I had my moments. It's tough. It's not easy.
By nature, I'm an optimist. By nurture, as in life experiences, I'm a pessimist, so I'm both. But one of my favourite mindfulness teachers has a great expression, which is that life sucks, everything changes, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
And I'll just add one more thing, that another mindfulness teacher who's had a big influence on my life has changed that expression to point out to me that life sucks and sings, everything changes. Don't take it personally.
And they're words to get tattooed on your neck or forearm or whatever part of your body you want to tattoo. These guys have written 3 great books, 1 each, not 3. Buy their books. It's really good. You'll learn a lot. You'll become wiser when you read these books. And yeah, so I'm just going to open it up to, we've got time for a couple of questions. And these guys are going to do a walkout. They've just told me they're going to go on strike as panellists if there's any comments. They're going to leave the stage and refuse to sign any books. So yeah.
I did not say that.
Rick said it.
Yeah.
Hi. It's a question for Rick. I think I heard you on the radio saying you had a bit of a aha moment about being treated for anxiety and depression, which was completely wrong.
Yep.
And needed to be treated for trauma. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's my very first diagnosis when I was coming out as gay as a uni kid on the Gold Coast was just depression and anxiety. They had 10 minutes with me, and no one since across 7 different psychologists has ever queried that diagnosis, because it was just on the file, and they're like, all right, that's what we're treating and that's what we're going to do. And funnily enough, I never blamed that counsellor at the time for that diagnosis, and she actually got in touch with me after this book came out and was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't know that there was this broken boy in front of me, and I had 10 minutes and that's all we could do. She was on campus, and now she's a trauma specialist. And so, and the treatment is different for those things. And so it really hobbled me, I think. And I also, because no one ever mentioned it, not even in sessions going, oh yeah, maybe you've experienced a lot of trauma. They just said, yep, you're, very anxious. And
did they not ask you?
No, I told them my life story every time. And then they just kept doing cognitive behaviour therapy or talk therapy and never mentioned that there was something deeper going on. Yeah, which was really frustrating, but I don't blame anyone for it because that's the system we've got. I'm all in favour of getting angry at systems and not at people.
This is addressing all of you. So you've obviously all come from very different backgrounds, very different life experiences, but listening to your self-exploration, I suppose we would call it, sounds to me like acceptance of self is a big part of it, and also a bit of a simpler perspective on life for yourself. And in your case, Nick, obviously the people around you in the past and now in more recent times have been a big mover of you feeling like you're in a bit of space. Is that all part of the mindfulness journey? And
Yeah, the thing that's interesting to me about mindfulness training and the mindfulness journey is that it's really different for everybody. We all kind of come into this, I'm talking specifically about mindfulness training, which is obviously where what I can speak to as opposed to other modalities. But I think that it is a journey to the self, but it's actually a journey to what is real and what is true and what is the nature of reality. I think that many well-intended people have actually misbranded mindfulness training as being for a whole variety of things, including performance enhancement, or you could even talk about, people talk about finding their authentic selves through mindfulness training. It's actually much more simple than that. It is just simply learning to understand what is happening. And sometimes what is happening now is that you're in the midst of a traumatic flare-up. And so I have a big problem with people who say, just be in the moment. Because if anybody who's ever experienced a breakdown of any sort or deep depression, when you're in that space, you want to be anywhere but the moment. And so I think that it can actually sometimes be a little bit dangerous to kind of brand mindfulness as just being here now, because without the skill of a very, very experienced teacher, you could end up doing more damage. I've witnessed somebody who I did a mindfulness course with who for the very first time, something similar to what I think you went through in your 20s, actually started doing the inner work. And he had never, ever done that work before. And he had developed all these really high-functioning coping mechanisms to deal with his past experiences that were actually, doing okay. He was a dad and he had a great job and he was earning a good salary, so on the surface he looked fantastic. But the mindfulness training uncovered all of this stuff without a skilled teacher to guide him through that could have done a lot more damage than good. So I think I'm just really careful about not overselling mindfulness as being a quick fix, something that's really simple. It's a bit more complicated than that.
I guess things to that question though was like, what's the key to the three of you finding your thing, accepting yourself?
God, no. No, I get what you're saying. It's probably, I think self-awareness is a better way to look at it, because I think self-acceptance suggests I have to feel good about who I am all the time, or I am, yes, like it's part of it, but it's just so much more expansive than that. Does that make sense? It's like what we do when we peel away the layers and we go in, as we create a rich experience, hopefully, with the right help, with the right instructors, with the right people, whatever it is that you're doing, so that we actually understand our place in the world more. And our individual self becomes more muted because we are part of a greater whole. So part of my journey hasn't been zoning in on me, Amal, the individual. It's been zoning in on me, the individual, to understand my place in an entire world of individuals. Am I confusing you, or does that make sense?
I might just go for one more.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
I love what you said about, not living in the moment, because I had this wonderful therapist who meant well, but she kept trying to make me do cognitive behaviour therapy, and I had to write down every half hour of every day that I was awake, which at that point was about 22 hours a day, how I was feeling, what I was doing, what I was eating, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because I was in so much pain and I was in so much distress. And it didn't help, and it was completely misguided. I mean, most of the work that I've done, really quickly, has been to just get as far as I can up to and beyond the barrier between my subconscious brain and my conscious brain. We all think that our conscious brain is aware of far more than it actually is. When you're driving and you brake suddenly in traffic, you've done that before you're aware of it. Your body is doing things that you are not in control of. And I wanted to get as close as I could to that kernel of truth, going, what is my amygdala doing? What is this little idiot doing? Trying to protect me, thinking it's helping, but not actually helping. It's kind of like Manuel in Faulty Towers. Like, that's my amygdala. Just setting stuff on fire and being hit every now and then. And that's what this journey was for me, like trying to understand the mechanics of it. And it's like, if Herbie the Love Bug had a faulty spark plug and wanted to fix it himself, it's not called mindfulness. But like, it's getting into the mechanics of the thing is part of the process, I think, certainly for me.
Yes. I'll just add one more thing. It's like saying to yourself, is the version of me that's binging on chocolate at 10 o'clock at night less authentic than the version of me that is heading off to the gym in my gym clothes, you know, being all healthy? I think those two versions of me are my authentic self. That is my present experience, and I think that this work is about being aware and waking up to whatever is happening.
I did get a personal trainer also in January last year for the first time. I got a personal trainer called Bruno. We had 5 sessions and then it was all over.
Okay, we've got a couple, just like Ivan's dad down the back, just got a question, and then we'll go here, and then we're going to finish. I won't be offended, or none of us will be offended if you guys want to creep out, because we are hitting 2 o'clock, but I think we'll just do 2 more questions if everyone's okay. And then one of the sort of reasons for going over is that if we go over and these guys are a bit more generous with their time, then you all have to buy all 3 of their books. So
all
that's
3.
So, Ivan's dad?
Yeah. Just a comment from me in terms of...
No comments, Ivan's dad.
Building resilience of, I heard the various writers and that they're going on about it. But to me, resilience being a situational thing, how do we start developing that from an earlier stage before problems start emerging, and particularly with the younger generation in the age of technology, where there is less awareness and less time to be interacting with our loved ones in making, knowing where they're coming from.
Exactly. So that actually was a good question, not a comment.
He turned it he turned it into a question.
Just really quickly, guys, we'll do a quick buzz. Resilience, how do you get it? How important is it? And how do young people develop it?
It's what you said. Don't take the world personally. Like, it's self-esteem related, and I think kids suffer hugely when it comes to self-esteem. So, right? Like, it's tied in.
Sounds like a good book, actually.
If only someone had written about this.
What if somebody is writing about it currently?
Oh, you heard it here first.
Plug.
Sorry.
Super quickly, I think resilience is it's almost accidental. Like, children are naturally resilient. It doesn't mean that you want to abuse them until they are, impervious to things. But, there were some things I could have handled in my childhood that set me up for life. And people, I know kids who come from really wealthy families, who are, an only child, who, as soon as something goes mildly wrong for them in their career or their life, they can't handle it. And I'm like, welcome to the club. That stuff, we've been doing that for years. So, there's a level, but it's not something scientific. I don't know that you would ever want to say this is an ideal level of kind of suffering that someone has to go through before they're resilient.
Experience creates resilience. Yeah.
I was in a supermarket with my young 4-year-old son last week, and he was wanting something desperately. It was a toy. It's like any parent who's been in a supermarket with a small child will know that the pain of that situation. And it was escalating and escalating and escalating. And I thought, okay, this is a moment to teach resilience. Obviously the instinct is to save my own embarrassment and to just buy him the $4 toy. But instead, I just stopped everything right there in the middle of the supermarket and sat with him as he was experiencing the feeling of wanting. And yeah, you're wanting right now. Wow, you're wanting. God, what does it feel like? Where can you feel it in your body? Yeah, you really want that. And we sat and we sat and we sat, and I said to him, tell me when it passes.
Did
you say, Mum, you're embarrassing me. I'm not going to want anything.
Okay, Mum, all right, I don't want it that much. Let's just go.
Do you also do this for dating? Because I could use a you in my life.
And just final question here. Thanks.
Yes, hello. I, some time ago, years ago now, but it just came to mind hearing to speak, especially with relation to equality and the problem with the structures of society. And for me, often I hit this point where I think we're dealing with the symptom rather than the cause when we've got all these structural imbalances. And I remember watching a YouTube about a country, I think it was Sweden or something, and they have a different schooling structure where they have, I think, maybe 3 days at school or something, and their scores of their literacy and their mathematics and everything were they were beating all the other countries. So sometimes I think about these sorts of things, these like structural, very basic things that we take for granted in our society that can be addressed to have massive effects and consequences. And then I question, why isn't this being done? Because I mustn't be the only one that's aware of this. So I was just wondering if you've had anything come up about things that can be done, on a very practical, thoughts that have come up on a very practical basis in terms of, if Sweden or whatever, sorry, I don't know what country it was, you can probably Google it, but if they can do it, why can't Australia do it? If their productivity levels are going up when they're spending more time with their children and they're having more rest time and no homework.
Yeah, so I guess one line from each panellist, what policy change, if you were Scott Morrison for a day, what's the one policy change that you would make in order to make us all happier, more resilient, more tranquil and more robust?
I covered the Productivity Commission report into mental health, and they literally said the welfare system with its punitive requirements and mutual obligations is making people sick. The government has that report. They've done nothing with it. They will never do anything with it because they don't actually care.
You're talking mutual obligations with JobKeeper?
With Job Seeker, I should say. So unemployment benefits, where they force you to apply for 20 jobs a month. They force you into work for the dole, even though you can't technically be forced into it, but they trick you. They do all of these things because there's this idea that you must work for the unemployment benefit. That, frankly, is just bullshit. And there are a lot of well-meaning progressives who actually kind of secretly believe that. I used to in the back of my mind, where it's like, it's not that bad if, you do something that's like volunteering almost. It is, because it robs people of the ability to actually make decisions about their own lives and to get their mental health in a space where they're, instead of worrying about the government coming to take away their payment, because one missed payment can ruin your entire life, even when it's not your fault. That's something that they know about. They know the causes of these things and they refuse to do anything about it, and they could solve half the burden of mental health tomorrow if they fixed it.
Aged care is a great example of where we're falling flat, and I think it says a lot about our society that we are not thinking about that could be us one day. And why is it taking it this long to identify the holes in the system and for the government to put money towards aged care facilities and taking care of the elderly? I talked a lot about that in my previous book because it was quite horrifying to see how little we cared, even though that would one day affect us. So I think we're very... Oh, thank you. We're very caught up in the now, in that sense of like, that's never going to be me, and making money and all these sorts of things, whereas we could use our money better, I think. And creativity in the classroom, I think it's a big thing.
Prevention is better than cure. I think we don't spend anywhere near enough on research and systems change that is all about prevention, and I'm talking about prevention not just with mental health, but also with physical health and chronic disease.
Fantastic. We'll give a round of applause for our panellists.
Thank you, Brigid.